Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you this week from Ra'anana here in Israel. It is the week of October 2nd, 2025, and this is episode 101, entitled The Case for Destroying Gaza City. And I know that's a very loaded title, obviously a lot to unpack there, and I will explain a little bit before diving into it. Before we begin, a couple things. First, a huge thank you to all of you who have donated so far to support the podcast. I'm just over halfway to my goal. My goal is $12,000 to raise, which would be $1,000 a month, which is about what it costs to produce this podcast between the editing, the production, and all that other unglorious stuff that goes on behind the headlines. I'm going to put the information in the chat for those of you on the live audience to give if you have not already, and those of you listening at home, if you have not yet given and would like to, very simple, joelchasnoff.com. Right on the homepage, scroll down, you'll see the link to give. And I'm not going to go on like this week after week. I'll mention it at the end of this podcast one more time, probably at the start of next week, and then that's it. I figure if you've wanted to give by now, you will have. And if you don't want to, then you won't, and I'm not going to twist arms. But to all of those who have, a huge toda rabbah. It really helps. Second, a lot of you have written in response to last week's episode 100, which was the interview with Professor Don Ben David. Again, if you have not listened to that yet, I really encourage you to do so. He lays out 4 big changes that Israel needs to make, not should make, not that he would like to make. Literally, that Israel needs to make if we want this country to be here in 40 years. He doesn't take it for granted that Israel will exist in 40 years. What I love about talking with Don Ben David is he doesn't use emotion. He uses demographics, statistics, and facts to really lay out the argument for what needs to change, as well as why it's so difficult to implement these changes. So if you haven't listened to that yet, it's only on Apple and on Spotify. If you need the links to those platforms, again, joelchasnoff.com/podcast, you'll see buttons right there where you can click on Apple or Spotify and get it on your podcast player. Finally, next Monday, the 6th of October, I will be departing for the U.S. for a 2.5-month tour. You can see joelchasnoff.com/shows for my tour schedule, and I would love to see you guys while I am on the road. So drop me a note ahead of time if you plan to be at one of those events. It's really an interesting tour. It's a mix of stand-up comedy shows, which I've done for 20 plus years, but also talking about the book, Israel 201. And I'm also doing events called Inside Israel Live, which is really this podcast, but in front of a live audience. I'm not actually recording them, but it's the podcast style in front of an audience where I talk about contemporary issues facing Israel today. I take your questions from the audience. So it's really a chance to get an insider's look at Israel as if the podcast is coming directly to you. Okay, now on to today's main topic. The title again, The Case for Destroying Gaza City. And before I say anything else, I need to make clear that I, Joel Chasnoff, the host of this podcast, do not believe that we should destroy Gaza City. And I'm not just pulling that idea out of thin air that Gaza City would be destroyed. Right now, the IDF has the mission to destroy Gaza City. That's been declared by Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, his war cabinet, and the chief of staff of the IDF. So right now, the IDF is engaged in a mission to destroy Gaza City. And just on a personal note, I was in shul yesterday in synagogue this past week. I found a lovely new synagogue. It's not new, but it is for me here in Ra'anana. I'll tell you more about that in a different episode. But I had a long conversation with a tank soldier. You know, I was a tank soldier myself, and one of the young men there, I'm friends with his dad. He's a tank soldier, and he's been in Gaza for the past 6 months. In fact, his basic training and tank training were shortened here in Israel so that they could send the boys to Gaza as quickly as possible. And I asked him all about what he's doing in this idea of destroying Gaza. And he could really only tell me from the viewpoint of one soldier what they are doing. But yes, he, his tank crew, and the IDF in general are right now involved in a mission to destroy Gaza City. And so I want to make clear from the get-go that my personal opinion is not that we should destroy Gaza. In fact, I feel that we shouldn't. I feel that we shouldn't because the chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, actually, his first instinct was to say that we should not destroy Gaza City. And only when he was pushed by the war cabinet and Bibi, the prime minister, only then did he formulate a plan for doing so. But he said from the get-go that it was not a good idea to destroy Gaza City. So I am relying on his opinion. I'm relying on the opinions of former officers in the Shin Bet, the IDF, the Shabak, other security services within Israel, all of whom have said it would endanger Israel long term and endanger the lives of the hostages and endanger IDF soldiers if we were to try to destroy and take over Gaza City. Nevertheless, it is happening, and that is the mission of the IDF right now. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, why am I doing this episode? Why should I now lay out the argument for why we should destroy Gaza City? It sounds counterintuitive. We're talking about missions. The mission of this podcast is to try to give you as broad a point of view of a life in Israel right now as possible. And that includes showing you, exposing you to opinions that I personally don't agree with, but that have a lot of legitimacy here in Israel. And by legitimacy, I mean that many people within the population actually do believe that we should destroy Gaza City. And I'm not saying the majority, but enough that you would call it a significant number. I also need to say that as I lay out this three-point argument for destroying Gaza City, it's not like I have to do deep method acting to try to present this argument to you. To tell you the complete truth, there is a part of me deep, deep down that does want to demolish Gaza City and wants to demolish all of Gaza. It's that part of me that I think a lot of us Israelis have, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you have as well. Deep down in your gut, that we just want to punish them, and we want to destroy them and remove the threat once and for all. And all those arguments about innocent Gazans and children and women, in my gut, I don't even know if I believe those arguments because I know what happened on October 7th. I know how hostages were taken from Israel into Gaza and were beaten by Gazan teenagers and Gazan women and kids, and that hostages held in Gazan apartments with families were taunted by the children of those families. So this whole idea of innocent Gazans, it's not like it deters me from having these really dark feelings about wanting to completely demolish Gaza City and all of Gaza. So it's not like I have to go, imagining what it would be like to be one of those people who wants these things to happen. No, it's actually kind of easy because there is a dark place in my soul that wants to do this to them. And yet the better part of me knows that it's not the solution, and it's really not in our best interest either. That's really just the inclination toward revenge and punishment that I know isn't really in the best interest of Israel or the soldiers or the hostages. So what are these arguments for destroying Gaza City? And I do want to leave it to you to decide what you think is legitimate and what isn't. You can email. I'd really love to hear from you by email after this episode what you think of these arguments. And I'll read some of them on the air. I won't use your names because they might reveal a part of yourselves that you might not necessarily want to make public or share. But I do want to hear from you. So number one, and not in any order of importance, but just simply point number one for why we should destroy Gaza, to remove the immediate threat. Because let's be honest, No matter how much the IDF has accomplished in Gaza, no matter how many Hamas operatives we've killed, probably around 20,000, no matter how many tunnels we've blown up, how many buildings we've destroyed, how many weapons we've captured, the fact of the matter remains. There is still not a minimal amount. There is a lot. There is plenty of Hamas infrastructure still in place in Gaza. We're talking about weaponry, RPGs, roadside bombs, the equipment they need to plant roadside bombs. Sadly, we had more soldiers just killed in the past 2 weeks from these roadside bombs in Gaza. We're talking about tunnels, miles and miles of the underground tunnel network still remain in place. And from what intelligence is saying in the US and here in Israel, it's very likely that there are close to as many Hamas operatives around now as there were on October 6th, simply because they have been recruiting new members. Now, that doesn't mean they have the money they used to have. They don't have the backing or the direct funnel from Iran that they used to have. But in terms of the number of Hamas operatives who are still there, it's not like we've killed 20,000 and now that's 20,000 less. They have multiplied. They're recruiting. They're growing in ranks. And so one argument for destroying Gaza City, which is the really last big stronghold that Hamas has, is to wipe out the remaining infrastructure, or as much as we can as possible, because we are fools. We are absolutely naive if we think that those tunnels are just going to remain under Gaza unused, or to store food, or to store school books, or flour, or whatever else they need to lead a normal life in Gaza. In fact, we'd be idiots to think that those tunnels would not be used to plan and carry out future attacks of some sort. So, argument number one for destroying Gaza City is to continue wiping out the infrastructure. And you might say, well, what about the hostages? Well, those arguing this point would say, at this point, hostages be damned. At this point, with 22 remaining hostages alive, and the latest news out of Israel within the last hour is that the IDF can no longer even verify that 22 are alive. It seems like it might be at the most 20, because Hamas is claiming they no longer have contact with two of those living hostages. So those arguing for the destruction of Gaza City would say, really? For 20 living hostages, we are not going to destroy the remaining Hamas infrastructure? And by the way, infrastructure includes buildings, computer networks, computer terminals where they work, where they operate, where they recruit. The immediate threat needs to be removed, because we are foolish if we think that the infrastructure that's there right now would not be used again. So that's number one. The second argument is the long-term threat. Forget about the threat right now, but the threat in the long term. And this sort of relates to the idea of the killing of innocents. You know, there was a story that broke in Israel this last week of a musician that many of you have heard of and probably love, Idan Reichel. He's one of the most beloved Israeli musicians around the world, certainly within the Jewish community. And I say that because I know he tours in the US and Canada, I think the UK, maybe Australia. He does amazing concerts. He's a great showman. His music is so uplifting and so authentically Israeli and original at the same time. Well, a story came out this week that I think it was 15 years ago. Idan Reichel was part of an organization here in Israel. I think it was called Save the Children. And one of the branches of Save the Children is to help get heart transplants for kids in the West Bank and Gaza who are sick. And Idan Reichel, here's what happened. There was a photograph found in a Gaza apartment building this week by IDF soldiers where it showed in the photograph Idan Reichel, the musician, in a hospital room with a Gazan little boy who needed a heart transplant. And Idan Reichel was the one who helped facilitate the heart transplant for this little boy and saved his life. And along with this photograph was another photograph of that same boy now, 15 years later. He's about 17, 18 years old. And he's dressed in full Hamas regalia. He is a member of Hamas. Why am I telling you this? Because the idea that there's no long-term threat to Israel is also naive and foolish, because the young children in Gaza now will grow up to be members of Hamas later on, even if their lives were literally saved by Israelis when they needed a heart, when they were just a little child. So another argument for destroying Gaza City is, and I hate to say this, it's so unpolitically correct, but another argument is to kill as many Gazans as possible, because killing Gazans means killing potential Hamas members now and future Hamas members down the road. Again, we'd be foolish to think that the children in Gaza are going to grow up loving Israel, wanting to live next to Israel. Their books, their school books in school in Gaza teach them to count by killing dead Israelis. So 1 dead Israeli soldier, 2 dead Israeli soldiers. That is how they learn to count in Gaza, in their school books and in their education system. So that argument is that for the sake of the long-term threat, we need to destroy Gaza City and not worry about killing Gazans in the process, because they are our future enemy. And anyone who believes otherwise is naive and living in a different world than reality. And I can already see the arguments, but that's genocide, but that's the argument, but that's genocide. How can you ethically do that? And what they would argue, what those proposing the destruction of Gaza City and the killing of innocents would argue, is that every country in the world that exists right now, every flourishing country, did it on the back of some sort of mass killing. The United States dropped bombs on Japan, Hiroshima. How many innocent people were killed? Would we have the life we have today in the U.S. if we had not killed innocents in Japan and in World War II? Tell me any other country in the world, they would say. Show me any other country. The UK, which accuses Israel of colonizing. Is there not, has the UK not colonized every available piece of land that it possibly could have in their history, killing millions along the way? So this idea that no other country has ever killed innocents, but only Israel is, it's hypocritical and it's ludicrous. And whereas other countries were doing it to expand their power, Israel is doing it as a matter of self-defense. Again, from the beginning, Israel has said, we will end the war when you release the hostages, put down your arms, and stop calling for an end to Israel's destruction. Those 3 conditions, and they're very simple. And yet Hamas and the people of Gaza have refused to do so. So the argument is, this is not genocide. This is a war of self-defense. And there is collateral damage in war. And innocents do get killed along the way. And show me any other country that hasn't had that experience. Again, as I said at the start of this section of the podcast, this is not Joel's opinion, but I'm arguing the side that is advocating for the destruction of Gaza City. And number 3, and this might be the most important of all, and this is one that I actually kind of agree with as Joel personally, is the message, as we say in Hebrew, hamesel. I've talked numerous times on this podcast about how in the Middle East, a different language is spoken. This is not a part of the world where diplomacy is worked out through conversations and people sign treaties and abide by them. And that's the problem that Americans, Canadians, Westerners, they don't grasp that in the Middle East, we speak a different language. And the language we speak in the the language we speak in the Middle East is the language of power and strength and also embarrassment, shame, and saving face. I've talked about that too, how important the idea of saving face is in the Middle East in general and in the Arab world in particular. And in the Middle East, one of the most important things you can do is send a message. And what Israel needs to do now, the argument goes, and I agree with a little bit too, is we need to send a message not only to Hamas, but to the rest of the Arab world that badass Israel is back and here to stay, that you do not mess with us. And this was the Israel of old. This was the Israel that won a war in 6 days in 1967. This was an Israel that in July of 1976, while America literally was celebrating its bicentennial, sent a Black Hawk airplane to Uganda with a black Mercedes inside. And Yoni Netanyahu led a raid of commandos at the airport in Uganda, freeing Israeli hostages who'd been on a plane that was hijacked and then they were kidnapped. And Yoni Netanyahu was the only casualty in that operation, Operation Thunderbolt, the raid on Entebbe. That was the badass Israel that snuck into Uganda, flew below the radar, built a car to look exactly like that of the dictator of Uganda at the time, and rescued the hostages. That was the badass Israel that was silent for many years as we got bogged down in 18-year wars of attrition in Lebanon, and then another war in Lebanon, and we worried about what the rest of the world would think about us. And a lot of us Israelis miss that badass Israel. And we got a taste of that badass Israel last summer, about a year ago, exactly 1 year ago, when we blew up all those pagers belonging to Hezbollah members in Hezbollah. And when you do something like that, when you blow up pagers, and when you kill Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and then you kill his replacement within 2 weeks, you're sending a message to the Arab world. Do not, and pardon my French here, but do not fuck with us. And badass Israel of old used to do that. But then we stopped for a long while. And we in Israel, for our own security and safety, need to get back to that badass Israel persona. You know, everyone in America talks about proportional response. In the Middle East, proportional response means disproportionate response. If they punch you, you don't punch them back. If they punch you, you beat the living daylights out of them until they can no longer move. That's proportional response in the Middle East. And the reason you do that is to send a message. Do not do this again. And if we leave Gaza, here's how the argument goes. If we leave Gaza now with tunnels still intact, in Gaza City standing, and Hamas weaponry and infrastructure in place, then the message we've sent is, you can mess with Israel. You can kidnap us. You can kidnap our soldiers. We'll end up releasing your prisoners and giving you what you want. The message we have to send in this part of the world is do not dare think of doing this again. We have to show them that we're crazy. You do what you did on October 7th, we will absolutely demolish your Gaza and kill as many people as it takes in the process. And yes, the world will cry and wring its hands and march, but this is our security, our existence on the line. And there's no room for error here. We cannot make the mistake of sending the message that we are soft. We have to show them that we are tough and we are not to be messed with. And the way we do that is by being crazy and going all out and dropping as many bombs as we have and completely demolishing them so that, yeah, they might hate Israel, but they also know not to mess with us ever again. And that, I think, is maybe the most important argument of those three. I can't talk about this without acknowledging that Trump has now put out this 21-point plan for ending the war in Gaza. And I'm going back to Joel here, speaking from the heart, truthfully and honestly. I reviewed the 21-point plan, and on the surface, like I can probably pick out a few things I would change or line edit, but overall, I think in the long term, this is what Israel needs. I mean, as much as we might fantasize about moving all the Gazans to Libya or Syria or Moldova or wherever and turning Gaza into a playland or Disneyland resort or what have you. Look, it's not going to happen. And I think deep down we all know that we're not moving 2 million Gazans out of Gaza. But what I am seeing right now in this 21-point plan is, first of all, that Gaza is demilitarized, that Hamas has no role in governing it, that all hostages are returned within 48 hours, and most importantly, that the world is on board. I mean, the world is saying we support the existence of the state of Israel, and we realize Israel's right to exist. And that's why Gaza needs to be demilitarized and free of Hamas. Now, they might not understand that the threat will still remain, but we have the world standing up and speaking out on behalf of our safety, security, and existence. That said, I do not think it's going to happen. Why? Because I just don't see any reason that it would happen. Why would Hamas give up the only bargaining chip it has, which is the hostages? Why would Hamas agree to not be a part of Gaza's future? Why would they agree to disarm? It ain't going to happen. And frankly, I don't think Bibi wants it to happen either, because if this were to happen, the right-wing faction of his government would absolutely rebel against him, and he would come down. So as much as Witkoff is saying we're more hopeful now than we have been over the past 2 years, as much as I think Trump said within 48 hours there are going to be some big surprises or good surprises along the way, I don't believe it. We've been to this dance too many times before to think that anything would actually change this time around. And again, you have to look at motivations. What motivation do either of the sides really have to implement a 21-point agreement like this? I hope I'm wrong. I want those hostages home. I don't see it happening. I'm going to take a couple seconds break. This is Inside Israel. I'll be right back with your questions. Welcome back to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff from Ra'anana. Our first question is from Gila This is a great question. She's writing in response to last week's interview with Professor Dan Ben David. She writes, after listening to the interview, I wonder, what should I say now to my friends in America who are seriously thinking of making Aliyah, moving to Israel? And she writes in parentheses, one already sold his house. And they say they should move to Israel because in a few years in the U.S., quote, we will have no choice. Given Professor Ben David's pessimism about Israel's future, should people consider making Aliyah? Wow, that is a great question. You hit, first of all, on an important point, which is that as challenging as things are in Israel right now, it's not like things are rosy everywhere else in the world. I personally, when I look at UK, Australia, even the US, despite how hard it is here, I still would rather be here. And in a future episode coming up very soon, I'm going to talk more in depth about that, the idea of Aliyah and why I advocate on behalf of it. So what do you say to friends who are seriously thinking of making Aliyah? Here's what I would say. I would say, go. It's a good choice, but be part of the process of change when you get there. Do not expect it to be a utopia. It's not a Jewish Disneyland. Understand that the country it's at a crossroads. It's going through a very difficult time right now, but be a part of the change. But I would not say, don't go, stay in the US, things are better here. I think ultimately it's still better to raise Jewish kids in Israel than in the US. And I'm, of course, not faulting those of you who are not, but I still think it's a good thing to make Aliyah. But you need to realize what the country is going through and to step up and be a part of the changes that are needed. Our second question is from Ruth. Ruth wrote, I loved your session today about your son's high school. This is the episode from 2 weeks ago, I believe. As usual, I learned a lot. I have two questions. Number one, don't a lot of Israeli teens have chugim, which means activities, in the afternoon that parents pay for? Of course, that's not the same as extracurricular activities offered by the school for free. Number two, what about youth groups in the afternoons? Don't a lot of teens gain a lot of skills by being part of youth groups? So what Ruth is writing about specifically is the part of the podcast where I mentioned that at my son's high school, like most high schools in Israel, he doesn't really have a lot of extracurricular activities to choose from. There's no school newspaper, there's no Spanish club, there's no math team, no debate team, all that stuff when you think of American high school. Not to mention football team, baseball team, hockey. Like those things don't exist at Israeli high schools. Now, there is a basketball team, but they're in a megama. They're on a track, a major, you might say, for basketball. So the way some kids will have a concentration in physics or math, some kids have a concentration in basketball, and they are the team that plays for the school, but it's not extracurricular. And I miss that because I am who I am today because of the extracurricular activities I got in my high school. I also am who I am because of the great education I got at Solomon Schechter for those first 9 years, K through 8. But I don't know what I would do if I didn't have drama, theater, acting, and all that on-stage stuff in high school, not to mention tennis. That's when I first started playing tennis as well. So what Ruth is asking is, don't Israeli teens have activities, chugim, that their parents pay for? And yes, there are chugim, but once you're a teenager, it's really not so cool to go to chugim. Chugim activities are mostly for, I would say, at ninth grade max, and that's where high school begins, is 10th grade here. So, my kid last year in ninth grade, he went to a couple of chugim, I think MMA and others, and you pay by the month and you switch around, and they're good, but they're kind of light. They're not the intensive activities that you would get at an American high school. But they really do stop for the most part in high school here, because it's just not so cool to go to chugim, and they're not really offered for kids that old for the most part. And as for youth groups, yeah, youth groups are still big, but if you're not in a youth group, then you're not in a youth group. Like, they really exist for the kids who've been in them since they were in first grade. Scouts, that Sofim, it's really big in Ra'anana. But, You don't really join when you're in high school. In fact, in high school, you've missed the boat if you haven't already joined once you're in 10th grade. I mean, it happens, but really rarely. Most kids in the Tzofim are in from, first, second grade on, and they grow up, in the movement and they go to their camps in the summer. So it's something that really began a long time ago. Whereas for me, I was introduced to theater and drama in high school through extracurriculars. I wrote for the school newspaper. I never had that experience before at Solomon Schechter. So I was introduced to these new things in high school, which, that's really not what's going to happen here at an Israeli high school. Now, what they do have is volunteer work. You are required to have, I think, 40 hours of volunteer work. I believe it's every year of your 3 years of high school. So they had a fair last week where they could explore different options, everything from riding in the back of an ambulance and being a fully trained paramedic. You have high schoolers here who are paramedics as part of their community service, or working. One of my favorites is called a Knafaim Shel Krembo, which is Krembo is like a chocolate candy here, and Knafaim is wings, but that doesn't at all explain what it is. It's basically working with kids who have Down syndrome and other mental challenges, and you play with them, you play games with them once a week, and help them with schoolwork, and you become their buddy. I think that's a great volunteer program. The one that my kid's interested in is, of course, the one where you fly overseas and you're an emissary for Israel. You go to wherever it is in 3 years, Belgium or France or Germany, and you get a trip out of it. So that's what he and a lot of kids want to do as their volunteer service. Is like, it's called Young Diplomats Club. But in any case, that is the activity that they do. But they don't have the regular extracurriculars that we are used to here in the US. But thanks for writing in with those questions. I would love to hear your feedback on this episode. This was a hard one. A lot of really non-PC things were said today as I was the oracle, as I was the mouthpiece for this argument, which is a very big argument here in Israel, and more people believe it than you might think. So I'd love to hear what you personally think of that. It's a complicated issue and not a simple one. Go ahead and write me through the website, joelchasnoff.com. That's also where you can, yes, support the podcast. On the homepage, there's a button, loud and obvious. And that's also where you can sign up for my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic. I'm sending out newsletters once a week with a Hebrew word that I dissect and show you some of the hidden meanings of. And right now I'm doing a series related to the Chagim, the high holiday season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and this whole idea of renewal and repentance and forgiveness and becoming better people. There are some amazing insights revealed through Hebrew words that I'll be sharing with you. Again, on the website is where you can do that. And joelchasnoff.com/shows for my tour schedule so we can see each other on the road. Next week's live broadcast will take place on Sunday, the 5th of October. That's the night before I depart at 8 p.m. Israel time, which is 1 p.m. for you on the East Coast there in the U.S. If you need the link to that, again, sign up for the Hebrew is Magic newsletter on my website. Thank you so much for joining this very difficult, but I think necessary episode as we talked about the future of Gaza City and of our relationship to ourselves as a country, depending on what actions we take. I'm Joel Chasnoff signing off from Ra'anana. I'll leave the chat open for those of you in the live broadcast for a couple more minutes. Until then, Shavua Tov, Tzom Kal, Lehitraot.